Okay, so this will be another Unity Basics. This one will be slightly more complicated than some of them in the past, but basically it'll show you how to use Sprite Sheets and how to get animations out of Sprite Sheets, and then also how to transition between different animations. For example, if you had if you had something that was walking and you want to transition to a run animation or an idle animation and transition into a walk animation, or any of those sorts of things, we'll show you how to do different states and how to transition between the two of them. So that's what we're going to do in this little talk here. We'll create a new project, and maybe there we go. I will call it UnityBasics, and this will be Sprite Sheets. It'll be a 2D project. Analytics will leave off. No asset packs, so just UnityBasics, Sprite Sheets, and we'll create projects. We'll be using some more glitch the game assets in this one, and specifically there's some animations in there that we're going to be using. So you can go find the glitch assets or find any sprite sheet is actually going to work for this. It doesn't really matter. But again, we've got an empty 2D project right here, and let me show you what we're going to use two. Let's see. So I'm going to use in here bag butler accessory. You can probably zoom in on this and figure out the exact file name because it's super gigantic. But I'm going to double click on this and show you, oops, not that one, what a sprite sheet looks like. So we have all of these different things. And this one, basically the way Glitch names things, or the way my script named things when I was pulling them out of their Flash files, is we've got all this stuff here that describes what it is, and then down here at the end, the very end, jiggling my mouse, it says what animation this is. And so this is an idle one animation. So this is an animation that you would play of just this guy kind of standing there. And here he is. And this is a sprite sheet. So a sprite sheet is each individual frame of an animation is kind of a row or column, an entry into this one big sprite. So this is one big gigantic PNG. And then to play an animation, it's basically like a flip book. You have a different frame on each page. In software, we're going to flip through, going across the rows all the way across. And when we play them very fast, it's going to look like an animation. And most of these should look pretty good. And so I'm going to take this idle animation and drag it in. We'll just import it like we normally do into our assets. There you go. This huge, gigantic thing. And then I am also going to get one more. So this is idle. Let's grab, how about, and these are all the different things this guy can do. I'm going to say, let's just do a bow. So this is a bow. He can dance, he can fall, he can fast dance, he can jump, he can step back, he can walk, he can wave, all these things. Let's just do bow. Now, I haven't looked at these ahead of time, so who knows? Sometimes getting assets from somebody else, you don't know what kind of condition they're in, but most of these assets for glitch are pretty good. So I'm going to rename this thing right here because it's just super gigantic. I'm just going to call this bow. And I'll just call this one idle. So I just, clicked on it once to rename it. And now we've got these things down here. So normally if we were going to bring something into our scene, we would just drag it in. But when we do that, we get every single frame. And I'm going to just make a couple changes here to my main camera. Remember, I don't like this blue, so I'm going to change it to that. And if we run, here we have this. And we don't want that. We want an animation playing for each of these things. We don't want to see each individual frame because that's not what it's designed to do. So I am going to delete this idle out of here on the left, get it out. And what we need to do is we need to tell Unity that this thing is an animation, that it's a sprite sheet with a bunch of individual frames. So the way we do that is we click on it down here in Assets, and then we go over here to the inspector to import settings, and texture type is Sprite 2D UI. That's fine. Sprite mode is single, which means this contains one image, and it doesn't. We have multiple, so we're going to click on multiple. And now it's going to know that this thing has multiple things. But before we can actually use it, we need to do a little bit more work to explain how do you sort of slice up this sprite with multiple images inside of it. And we're going to do that by hitting this Sprite Editor. So I'm over here on the right, and we'll hit Sprite Editor. It's going to ask, do you want to imply our import settings, which is basically setting this thing to be a multiple. We'll hit apply. And then it should open up our Sprite Editor. Here it is. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Oh, where'd it go? Windows. Well, let me click on it again. I lost it. Sprite Editor. And I'm just going to dock this thing up at the top so I don't lose it again. Sprite Editor. There we go. So here we have this thing of all of our sprites. Now we need to be able to figure out, how to tell Unity where each of the boundaries are for each of these things. And this is really cool because Unity really does most of it for us. So up here we have a slice button, and so I clicked on that right here. See my big mouse. And type is automatic, pivot center, method, delete existing. All this is fine if we want Unity to figure it out. The other options that we have here is grid by cell size, so we can say how many pixels width and height, or we can say grid by cell count, how many rows and columns do we have. So let's just do automatic and see what happens. And it looks like it did a pretty good job. If you zoom in, it may be hard to see because of this checkered background, but it did sort of draw a rectangle around each of these frames. Now, the one thing that it doesn't do when you do this automatic is it's going to find non-transparent pixels and draw a box around that. And so that may not be what you want, because it might give a little like shifting left or right or up or down. If you want fixed size, then do grid cell by count, and that's going to give you every single frame will be the exact same dimensions. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. They're both fine. They both work in different ways. I'm just going to leave it at this right now. It'll probably be okay. And if it isn't, I'll sort of point out what the issues are. But yeah, that's part of it. Okay, so then we've selected automatic. We hit slice. We're good. And then I've got to come over here, see my mouse, and hit apply. And it found 154 sprites. That sounds good to me. We'll go back to our scene. And now I can drag this in. And it's going to say we're going to create a new animation. So we can call it idle animation. So it recognized that this has multiple sprites inside of it. And it also knows that we've sliced it up so it can determine where the frames are to create an animation for us. So we'll save that. And there we go. So now, after we've done all that work, we've got our little guy here. We've got our animation and our animation controller. And let's see what happens when we hit play. There he is. So it is kind of skating around a little bit. Woo. If we had sliced it with fixed row and columns, you probably wouldn't get this sort of sliding back and forth business going on. But that's okay. The other thing is this is kind of small, so I'm going to scale this thing up just so we can see it. And let's see. There he is. Yeah, it looks a little weird just because we started with such a small image. It's extremely pixelated, but that's all right. I mean, we've got the idea that this thing is animating. And it's just going to continue animating over and over and over again because we have down here in our controller, we have this loop time checked. So if we uncheck this, it's just going to play it once and stop. But I'll leave that thing on there. I'll leave it checked. And in our animation tab, which I have docked down here from a previous example, if you don't have an animation tab down here, you can go to Window, Animation. Animation, there it is. And it'll pop it up and you can drag it down here and dock it. Now there's an animator and there's an animation window. So right now we're in animation, which is what we used before when we were doing our keyframes and stuff. And you can see that throughout this timeline, there are all the million different frames of this animation. And if we want to speed this thing up, 12 frames a second is kind of slow. So if we did like 30 frames a second, it'll go a little bit faster. There he goes. And you know what? He is really kind of rocking back and forth. I'm going to go back and see if we can fix that. So back in here, so I've got my idle animation selected, or idle sprite sheet. I'm going to go back to the Sprite Editor. And I want to go to Slice. And instead of automatic, I'm going to do grid by cell count. And columns we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have 6 columns. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh, a lot of rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. 6 by 26. Slice. And is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I guess that's right. It's hard to see with that checkerboard, but I believe that's correct. And we should be done. So if I go back to my scene and hit play, see that change it at all? There it goes. Now his feet aren't sliding all over the place. See the difference from before? If you're confused what the difference was, you can just rewind a little bit and check it out. But so what we changed was automatic slicing to grid cell slicing. And you can see the difference that his feet aren't sliding around. And that's because of the transparent pixel issue. Since everything is a perfect rectangle, it's all going to stay in one space. So that's a good thing to notice. Okay, so that's it. We've got our animation. It's looping. It looks pretty good. Our little bag head guy. And let's see, what else do we want to do? So in the animation window, we sped it up. We changed samples to 30 frames a second. You can speed it up or slow it down, whatever you want. These are the individual frames that we imported off of our little sprite sheet. Now, if you hit this down arrow, since we've sliced this thing up, you can see each individual frame down here over in the right, if you want to. And our bow animation, we never sliced that one up, so it's still just one big PNG. All right, so our animation window shows us this. I'm going to open up one more window, the Animator window. And mine docked up at the top, which is where I want it. Yours could be, who knows where else. But you can dock it wherever you want, or just put it up there. So for our idle animation, let's see. Where are we at here? Exit. Where is... Usually there is a default animation. I don't see that in this one. Don't know why. Base layer. Well, this is very interesting. Let's see, what else do we have? No parameters. No mask. All right, well, we'll continue on with this and see what happens. It's kind of strange. Usually there is stuff in here, but we will figure that out when we get back. So maybe it's just because there's nothing happening in here. All right, so let's go back. I will go back to my scene. So right now we have this guy sort of sitting here doing this. What I want to do is I want to add another animation of him to make him bow. And then we'll tie that to a key, like, push the space bar to make him bow. So let's do that. So here's our bow animation. Again, if we drag that in, it'd be a huge thing like this, and we don't want that. We need to slice it up. So I will delete that. And then let's go to properties of this sprite. We'll change this to multiple. Again, I'm way over here on the right. And then we're going to click on Sprite Editor. We'll apply our settings. And then we slice. We'll do grid by count. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows, or 6 columns by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows. Slice it up. Looks good. Then I'll apply. Okay. Then if we go back to our scene, now our bow animation is indeed an animation. And I could drag it in. It would just be this one guy, which is fine. But what we want to do is we want to make these frames a separate animation as part of this idle guy, so that we can switch behind it. So we have idle animation. Again, I'm over here on the left. This is idle animation. We're going to create a new clip. We will call this bow animation. And we don't have anything in there. So what we need to do is I'm going to move this animation window up to the top for a second. And I move these things all around all the time, so that's okay. But here's our bow animation. And what we want to do is we want to drag in all the frames of our bow animation. So again, all I did just now is we had that animation tab docked down here at the bottom. I just kind of clicked on it here and dragged it up. And we have our idle animation and our bow animation. I'm going to click and shift and click, grab all of our frames and drag it up here. So there we go. Now we have our bow animation and our idle animation. And our idle animation is 30 frames so a second, so we'll make it be the same just so they're consistent. So idle animation, bow animation, and that should be good. So now if I hit play, we jump to our tab. It's just our idle animation. He's just going back and forth. Ooh, good, now it's working. So now if I go to my Animator tab, we have, why? I move all this stuff, there you go. So this stuff was kind of off screen a little bit. I had I just kind of dragged a rectangle around it and then I could move it around so I could see it. Maybe yours is in the middle, maybe not, who knows. But we've got now idle animation and bow animation that are tied to our, what we called idle, which is the first thing that we dragged in there. And on idle animation, if you right click on it, you see set as default state is not, you can't select it because it already is default, but I can make our bow animation our default state. So I right clicked on bow animation, select as default state. And now if I hit play, he should be bowing. There he goes. And if I go back to our Animator window and I right click on idle animation, set as default state, hit play, now he's doing his idle animation, which is this little thing here. All right. And so let me play it again and click on Animator. So here's this idle animation, play it all the way to the end, and it's going to loop back to the beginning. It's just showing you what state we're in. Now, what we want to have happen, and this is where it gets a little confusing, is that if I press the space bar, I want to transition from idle animation to bow animation. Like that's the idea. And so in order to do that, we're actually going to have to write a little bit of code to do that. So I'm going to unplay this thing. And in our Animator tab, we have this thing over here called parameters. And this is going to tell us, you know, when we need to transition to the bow animation. So I'll add one. And we'll say bool. And we'll say bow. Okay, so bow. Our code is going to say if the spacebar is pressed, then bow equals true, which means we want to do something. So we need to set up a transition between idle and bow. So I can right click on idle and say make a transition to bow. Let's click over there. And the transitions over here, transitions. Oh, click on the arrow. So now we have from idle to idle animation to bow animations. I've clicked on the arrow, so it's blue, and it's going to give us conditions over here. So we want to transition from idle to bow when, and I'm going to click on the plus, bow is true. Okay, that's that new parameter that we made. And then we want to go back, make transition. I'll drag it up to idle, and then I'll click on this one. And our conditions are going to be when bow is false. All right. So we have this thing set up that says when bow is true, we're going to transition from this state to this state. When bow is false, we'll transition from this state to this state using this arrow here. Okay, so if I hit play again, I'm hitting the space bar, nothing's happening. So what we've done is we've linked up these two transitions, these states, these two animations, And we've said when it's time to bow, we're going to switch to the bow animation, and when we're not bowing, we will switch back to idle animation. But the one thing that we haven't done is put the code in that says, okay, if somebody presses the spacebar, that we are bowing. Like that piece of code hasn't happened yet. So let's fix that. And we're going to do that in code. So I will go back to here. I'm going to sort of unexpand this thing so we have some room. And I'm going to create a C# script. So I just right-clicked down here in the bottom, create C# script, and we are going to call it, let's just call it bow. Remember, when you're writing scripts, don't use spaces or any of that sort of thing. And bow, we're going to attach it to our idle character. So I clicked on idle up here, upper left, idle, and then I'm going to drag the bow, the C# script, over here to the right on this side. So I clicked on idle up here, then down here I clicked on the C# script called bow with the little C# icon, and I dragged it over to the right. And now there's a bow script attached to it. I'll double click on bow, and we can do some fun stuff. So really, oops, let's make this a little bigger. And we did some stuff by getting keys and things like that before. So basically what we want to do is we want to check and see if somebody is pressing the spacebar. So if input.get key code .space, and remember, open curly brace, close curly brace for functions, open curly brace, close curly brace for classes, open and close for any kind of if statements or any conditionals. All right. So if we've hit the space, we want to set, I'm going to put this in a comment. Actually, let me put this up here. So what we want to do, we want to say if space is pressed, set bow flag to true. If space is not pressed, set bow flag to false. All right, so remember these little slashes, those are comments, so we can just write notes to ourselves of what we're trying to do. So if space is pressed, that's this piece. Now we want to set bow flag to true. All right, now this one's gonna be a little bit crazy, so we're gonna I'll explain. I'm gonna type it in. We're gonna get component animator dot set bool bow. Come on, true. And oops, what's this doing here? There we go. All right, so this is a little bit a lot to type here, but let's just think it through. So we say if the space is pressed, which is what this line does, then we want to set the bow flag to true. Okay, so the bow flag, this thing, is in our animator tab, and it's a parameter called bow. Now the case makes all the difference in the world. So I labeled mine capital B-O-W. If yours is lowercase, make sure that in your code it's lowercase or that you change it here. Okay, so in order to set this flag to true, which is what we need to do to transition to our bow animation, we need to get this component, this animator component, so that we can set this bow flag. So get component animator in angle brackets, set bool bow to true. This is our bool bow, and we want to set it to true. So we get the animator up here, set bow to true. All right, and that's it. And remember, this script is attached to our idle animation, which is where that animator controller is attached to, so that this is only going to activate the bow animation of this one particular object in the scene. All right, let's see what happens now. If I hit play, and I'll go back to, and I'll hit the space bar. Let's see what happens. Go to our animator. Now he's doing his bow animation. So let's go back to the game. Now he's bowing. All right, so let me play it again. So I'll hit play, space. It's going to finish up its idle animation, and now it'll bow. and keep bowing. All right. So let's unbow. So let's do this other thing. And I can do this. Actually, this is too confusing. Let's just say else. New thing here. Okay, so this thing says, remember this, if space is pressed, set bow flag to true. If space is pressed, set bow to true. If space is not pressed, so that's what this else means, like if this thing isn't happening, which it's not pressed, then we set it to false. So that is this whole thing down here. Save that. And so what that should mean is, if I'm pressing space, we should be bowing. And then if I'm not pressing space, we should not be bowing, which means we're back idle. So let's take a look at it and see. All right, we're idle. Let's let him get through his animation all the way. If I click on Animator, we can see that it's going through and staying in this animation state. Go back to game, hold down space. Now he's bowing. Now he's back to idle. Space, bows, back to idle. Space down, idle. Space down. There he goes. All right, so one thing is that currently we finish off this idle animation before we transition to bow. In certain instances, you would want to not finish your idle animation. You'd want to jump right away to your next state, which is fine, and you can set it to do that. Other ways, you want to finish it, and it just depends on what you're doing. So this transition from idle to bow animation, again, I'm in the Animator tab, and I've selected this transition. This checkbox here says has exit time. Where am I at? There it is. That means when that's checked, which is the default, that means finish my first animation before transitioning to the second one. So if you want to bow as soon as you hit the space bar, then you would want to uncheck this thing. Here, I can uncheck it and we can see what happens. Idle, right to bow. But it's like a little jumpy. And so, you know, a lot of times animations are built to transition from one to the other. And so in that case, you would hit this thing. But then there's a delay. So it's kind of a toss-up, or, you know, trying to figure out how to achieve whatever effect you're trying to achieve. So that's that. So that's, I think, all I wanted to cover. It's a little bit longer. It's a half an hour. But we did two things. We covered sprite sheets, 2 different ways to slice them up. And then we did animation transitions. So that was, I guess, call it UnityBasic on 2D animations.